Does it seem like all of a sudden everyone is getting sick? Now that fall is here, everything from COVID-19 to RSV to the flu seem to be overtaking us all. But how worried should we be? And what's going on with the latest vaccines? So today on CityCast Portland, science journalist Aaron Ross is here to answer all our questions about viruses, vaccines, and if we should maybe consider masking up. It's Thursday, October 19th. I'm Claudia Meza, and this is what Portland's talking about. So, every flu season, do we now also have to worry about some new form of COVID and now RSV? Is this it? Is this what we're doing now?
I mean, maybe, yeah. It's honestly kind of a coincidence that flu and COVID have been surging at the same time because COVID doesn't really seem to be that seasonal. So, instead of being driven by weather like the cold and the flu are, it's actually driven by immunity, which is why you'll see these little these peaks and valleys coming every few months. But we get vaccinated in the fall. So we are way less immune come the next fall. And that's why we've been seeing these big surges time with the flu season. So as long as we're getting vaccinated in the fall, we'll keep having these fall surges.
But how is it looking? I'm not hearing that we're still seeing emergency rooms jammed up with COVID patients, but you're more hip to the scene. How is it looking this fall?
That's kind of about what seems to be the case. Yeah, that we're seeing hospitalizations for COVID's rise and we're seeing COVID-related deaths rise, but and we're seeing maybe as much, if not more COVID than we've ever had. But that giant wave of cases is not translating into a giant wave in the hospitals. People are way less likely to get hospitalized and way less likely to die from COVID right now than they have been at any point in the past, which is really good news. The bad news is that there's a lot of it going around, which means lots of different strains, lots of mutations, all of those things. But yeah, it kind of seems like right now things are looking a little bit better.
What about long COVID? Are people still developing symptoms?
Yeah, so unfortunately, yes, but again, also no. That's kind of the story of COVID right now is a mixed bag. So on a population level, way fewer people are developing long COVID after getting infected. But on an individual level, every time you get COVID, your risk of developing long COVID goes up. So you still want to avoid getting sick. That risk is still there. And the more you get sick, the higher it is.
I remember when long COVID symptoms were coming up that a lot of people thought oh, it's all in your head. And I feel like people weren't really believing other people that were having these experiences. Are we now all on the same page that long COVID symptoms do exist and they're real?
So I'm actually super glad that you brought this up because, long COVID has actually taught us a lot about other diseases. And I don't know how much you followed chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia, but if you have, you'll know that in the 2000s and in the 90s and 80s when they first showed up, it was first of all, it was mostly occurring in women. So, already doctors discount what women experience, but it was oh, you must just be depressed. And a lot of doctors were oh, it's psychosomatic and oh, we don't believe you. And over the years, there's been this increasing amount of evidence that these diseases seem to actually occur after you get a virus. And then we get this pandemic. And there's this new virus going around and suddenly everyone gets sick at the same time. And we start seeing long COVID show up. And long COVID has basically the same physiology and same pathology that you see in chronic fatigue, that you see in fibromyalgia. And so there's much more acceptance for long COVID right now. It's definitely happening. The scientific literature all agrees that it's happening. But I think kind of a bigger lesson from it has been that all these other viruses are probably causing kind of similar experiences too. We just never had this big data point of here's a new virus, here's all these infections. Instead, it was oh, you had a flu-like illness, now you have chronic fatigue. Our bodies respond in weird ways to getting infected, and it can cause really long-term complications.
Well, that's good to know that people are being taken more serious.
For all of these conditions that people were kind of gaslit about for years.
Yeah. And you're seeing people still develop symptoms and, I guess it's going to just continue to happen since if you get sick, it just happens.
Yeah, exactly. And just at lower rates in the population as a whole. But again, every time you get sick, the risk of it goes up. And there's there's some other weird things that come along with getting infected with COVID. Like there's a lot of evidence that shows that it actually makes you less immune to other diseases, which like measles was the only disease that we knew before this that kind of like wiped out your immunity.
Right.
So it's such like a weird thing to figure out your personal risk tolerance on, because like there's all these little things that don't have a big chance of happening, but if they happen, they're really bad. And then on top of that, you have like, even if it's a mild to moderate illness and that's all you get, like you have 2 weeks of being exhausted and feeling like crap. So.
Right. Well, speaking about risk, like how should people be thinking about the risk of going to enclosed public settings with all this in mind, you know?
Yeah, I'm still a big proponent of taking basic safety precautions, but like I also throw into that like also of living your life. We're social creatures. We got to get out and do things. So like I went to go see Death Cab in the Postal Service in Seattle a few weeks ago. It was awesome. And it was like a big stadium show and I masked up and not as many people were wearing masks as I would have liked to have seen, but other people were too. And, I went to this awesome show. I had a great time and I didn't get sick. And like, that's a win for me. So to me, like throwing a mask on when you're in a public space is just like not really a big deal. And it's such a simple thing to do to lower your risk. Even if other people around you aren't masking, the chances of you getting sick are pretty low. And if you're sick and you throw on a mask, the chances are pretty good that you won't get anybody else sick either. And like, why not just like do that? But, like definitely everybody has their own risk tolerances. Like if you're severely immunocompromised, if you're elderly, if you have respiratory illness, you might not feel comfortable going into a public space, even with a mask on. And to me, that's kind of more of a reason for the rest of us to mask. Like there are still people who are living pretty isolated lives. And if the rest of us lowered their risk just a little bit, like they could also return to normal.
All right, well, let's take a quick break here. And when we come back, let's talk about where people can find some free boosters and vaccines.
Are you tired of seeing Portland city government be so weak sauce? Progress Portland is a team of locals who come together to advocate for a more diverse, progressive city council in 2024. On our podcast, we interview exciting candidates like Angelina Murillo, running in District 3.
When I talk to people about public safety and public health, I try to explain to them that housing is public health and public safety. Adequate services for addiction, all of that is public safety.
And Steph Routh, running in District 1.
How do we knit together better policies that lift all boats, that we achieve shared prosperity?
District representation and an expanded council will mean a greater voice for the people of Portland. We want a city council that will fight for fair pay and strong unions, housing the homeless, and true police reform. Subscribe to the Progress Portland podcast now, wherever you listen to podcasts, and join our grassroots movement at progressportland.org.
What's up with the latest vaccines and boosters? Like, I heard there was a shortage.
Sort of. So over 8 million people have gotten a vaccine this season so far, which is awesome. But it can be hard to get. And it honestly really seems to depend on your insurance provider. I know a lot of folks who have like strolled into a CVS and gotten theirs right away. On the other hand, like I personally have made 3 appointments. And before each one, I've gotten a call that was like, hey, we actually ran out today, so don't come in.
Oh, my.
So I think it's really a grab bag. But there are vaccines out there, and there's the 2 mRNA vaccines that we're familiar with. And then there's also Novavax, which is uses pieces of what was a live virus.
Right. So one of our Hey Portland readers, that's our newsletter, Tara asked when the uninsured can get free COVID and flu shots. Do you happen to have the information on that?
I do. So there are still free vaccines being given to people who are uninsured through the CDC's Bridge Access Program. And I think this is pretty cool, is that it's not just uninsured people, but like if you're underinsured, I've heard of a lot of folks who are, who want to get the vaccine and have insurance, but it's too expensive. You also still qualify. So like if your insurance is making you pay for it, you can go get a free one from the government. And there's a nice map that helps you kind of find them. It's at vaccines.gov, like super easy to remember. I just looked for the greater Portland area and found I think I stopped counting at 200 places with free vaccines and available appointments in the next 7 days. So like you can totally get one. And it's a pretty cool program.
Yeah, and we'll put a link in our show notes for any resources that Erin has to share. So what about infants? Like, what vaccines can they get?
So they can get the mRNA vaccine starting when they're 8 months old. And that's a pretty good idea. Although, like, it still seems like young kids don't get quite as sick as adults do from this. But I mean, you don't want to mess around. And I would also plug the RSV and flu vaccines here because, RSV in adults, it's such a mild illness in virtually every adult. It's like one of the weakest feeling colds you can get. But for infants, it is a really serious issue. One of my friend's kids was just hospitalized in the ICU with RSV. And I mean, it was very touch and go for a while. So babies between 8 and 19 months can actually get the RSV vaccine. The rest of us can't unless we're elderly, but you can get that for your babies. And it is really a life-saving vaccine.
Yeah, I was going to ask if there's a tornado of event where it's just the flu, RSV, colds, COVID, everything, let's go. Have you heard, is this a particularly hard season for flu, RSV, and colds, or is it just normal plus COVID?
It's kind of normal plus COVID, but I mean, I think we kind of got lucky and had a series of very light RSV seasons for a while. And also RSV is something where once you have it, you kind of get a level of immunity. And so at this period where more babies are starting to return to preschool and things like that, even though it's been a year out, there's still a lot of babies who have never been exposed before. And so you just end up with a worse season because it's a lot of kids getting their first RSV when, maybe a quarter of those kids would be getting their second RSV infection and it wouldn't be so bad.
Is this going to be our new normal then? Are we just going to have to mask up forever, take boosters forever, always looking over our shoulder for the new COVID strain?
I mean, I wouldn't say that we always need to look over our shoulder. I think an attitude shift at this point is kind of justified. Right now, this is no longer a pandemic. This virus is endemic. It is here. It's here to stay. That is going to be the rest of our lives. And it's always going to be mutating. And maybe sometimes it'll get worse, just like we've had worse flu seasons in the past. But you've got to figure out a way to kind of live within that, right? So I don't really think being scared is the right take right now, but I'm probably going to be masking up in grocery stores and at big concerts forever because I haven't gotten sick in 3 years. And that's pretty awesome. I think a lot of people who worked in public health and who watched this pandemic unfold, I think a lot of them really hoped that this would kind of lead to a sea change in how we view disease as a whole. Especially in the US, in a lot of other countries, wearing a mask when you're sick has just been the thing that you do since the 80s. I mean, the producer for BTS, has been wearing masks as a fashion statement for virtually his entire career. That's you never see his face. That's his whole thing. So they're very normalized in other places.
I just love how you brought that in. You're just just an FYI.
BTS Army says wear a mask. That's what I'm saying. So I think it would be really nice if people would just kind of approach all diseases, whether it's just the sniffles or whether it's something very severe, by just taking a few little extra precautions that make the people around you a lot safer. And not just because of COVID, although I feel COVID is a good reason to maybe start doing that, to maybe bring the US on par with the rest of the world in terms of how do you handle being ill politely and with your fellow man in mind.
Right. So this is just part of accepting more risk.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that's the thing that it hurts me deeply to say, to be let's just accept more risk and try to find some sort of healthy normal. I really have been passionate throughout this whole thing about being very safe and doing what we can to minimize. And I still am, but you've got to figure out a way to live your life too. And the reality is that COVID is not as dangerous as it used to be. And it makes a really unfortunate situation though for the people who do have immune issues and are elderly and are highly at risk. It's a difficult thing to say and a difficult thing to hear, to kind of contemplate going about your life somewhere close to normal, where for some people that's just not really an option anymore.
Yeah. So basically mask up if you want to care about other people in public spaces, just this season or forever.
Just be nice. Think about somebody else before you take an action. Tell your friends, I'm rescheduling dinner because both my parents just tested positive and I was hanging out with them and we're going to wait a few days and see if I test negative and once I've had some time to incubate, because and it's not a big deal to do that. It's just really not a big deal. Just hey, I'm going to wait a few days, see if I test negative, and then we'll reschedule. Fine, we're going to have Thai food. It's going to be great.
Erin says, we're gonna have Thai food. It's gonna be great.
Exactly.
Well, Erin, thank you so much for hanging out with me today.
Thanks for having me.
And now for your microdose of news. There's an effort underway to increase passenger train service nationally, and the Washington Department of Transportation is considering raising the frequency of Amtrak trains between Seattle and Portland from 4 round trips to 16. Maybe that'll inspire more weekend trips, but until then, we have plenty of stuff happening in town. The Oddities and Curiosities Expo is happening at the Oregon Convention Center this weekend. There will be vendors, dealers, and artists from all over the country showcasing all things weird. Imagine a larger, more varied version of Paxton's Gate. And the Flipside Vegan Market, a POC queer-organized monthly event, is free and taking place this Saturday from 5 to 10 p.m. at Hale's Snail on North Interstate. And it will be Halloween-themed, so there will be trick-or-treating and tattoos, of course. Also, the Underhill Haunted House is underway at the Veterans Memorial Coliseum every weekend this month. There are earlier shows at noon for kids and later shows that get a bit scarier for adults. For even more local news and events, sign up for our daily newsletter, Hey Portland. We'll throw a link in the show notes. That's all for today here on CityCast Portland. Thanks so much for listening. If you have any comments on anything we've talked about on the show, feel free to email us at portland@citycast.fm or leave us a voicemail at 503-208-5448. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more from around the city. Until then, see you at Slim's.